Hey everyone! If you've ever felt like the odd one out during family gatherings, you're going to relate to this. It all started with a message that hit me harder than I expected. I was scrolling through my phone one chilly November evening when a blunt text popped up from my cousin Jenna. It read, "We don't have room for you this Thanksgiving." Just like that, without any softening or explanation, I was told I wasn't welcome. It wasn't just a casual brush off, it felt like a cold wall slammed in my face. Thanksgiving used to be a big deal for me, the one day when, despite all the awkwardness and unspoken tensions, I still held on to hope that maybe this year would be different. But this message made it clear that wasn't happening. Jenna's words weren't just about a lack of space, they spoke volumes about the distance that had grown between us over the years. I'd always been the black sheep of the family, the one who didn't quite fit the mold they expected. I wasn't the successful doctor or the high-flying executive cousin who came home with trophies and awards. I was the one quietly doing my own thing, often overlooked, the one who felt like an afterthought at every holiday table. I stared at her message for a long time, the screen's glow casting a harsh light in the dark room. I thought about all the times I had tried to stay connected, sending cards, calling on birthdays, showing up for family events even when it hurt. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, my efforts would chip away at the walls of indifference. But this message felt like the final seal. I wasn't just excluded this time, I was erased. The words echoed louder in my mind, "We don't have room for you." Room wasn't just about physical space, it was about emotional space, acceptance, belonging. And apparently, I didn't have any of that. I remember growing up, Thanksgiving was always a mixed bag for me. The house would fill with relatives I barely knew or pretended to like, the air thick with forced smiles and awkward silences. I watched as my cousins whispered about college plans or summer internships, while I struggled to explain my choices without feeling judged. They never asked about my work because it didn't fit their idea of success. I was the one who took the unconventional path jobs that didn't come with fancy titles, living a life that wasn't glamorous or easy to explain. It wasn't that I hadn't achieved anything. I just did it on my own terms, far from the spotlight. This message from Jenna wasn't just a rejection of my presence at the dinner table. It was a dismissal of everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I made to build a life I could be proud of. It was a reminder that to them, I was still the same person I had been in high school, the outsider, the misfit, the one who didn't belong. And that hurt more than I expected. I sat there, the quiet of my apartment wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. The turkey, the stuffing, the laughter I'd missed out on, none of it mattered anymore. What stung was the realization that family, the people who should have been my safe place, saw me as a problem to be solved by exclusion. I thought about the years of trying to prove myself, of showing up with open arms, only to be met with cold shoulders or polite nods that barely masked the judgment beneath. Yet, even as the pain settled in, a flicker of something else stirred inside me, not anger, not bitterness, but a quiet determination. I wasn't going to let this message define me, or let their rejection shape how I saw myself. I knew my worth wasn't tied to their approval or their cramped dining room. I had built a life that mattered, even if they couldn't see it. This wasn't the first time I'd been left out, and it certainly wouldn't be the last, but I refused to disappear quietly into the background. I thought back to the last Thanksgiving I'd spent with them. The forced smiles, the awkward conversations, the way I'd been talked over or ignored whenever the topic turned to careers or achievements. It was like being invisible in plain sight. I remember the sting of watching my cousins exchange knowing glances when I mentioned my freelance work, as if it were some kind of joke. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I felt smaller and smaller. This message from Jenna was the culmination of years of subtle exclusions and unspoken judgments, all wrapped up in a few cold words. But as I sat there, I realized something important. I had outgrown the need for their validation. I had carved out a space for myself, one that didn't depend on family approval or holiday invitations. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, quietly and on my own terms. I also knew that Thanksgiving wasn't just about family bloodlines or who showed up at the table. It was about connection, gratitude, and shared moments of kindness. Even if my biological family couldn't see my value, I was determined to find or create a space where I was welcomed and appreciated. I wasn't going to spend the day feeling sorry for myself or waiting for an invitation that might never come. So, as I put down my phone and stared out the window at the falling leaves, I made a decision. This year, Thanksgiving would be different not because my family had opened their doors to me, but because I was going to open mine. I wasn't just going to accept Jenna's message as the final word. I was going to find a way to turn exclusion into belonging, loneliness into community. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew I had to try. I pulled out my calendar and started making a list of people who might also be spending the holiday alone, neighbors, friends, anyone who might want to share a meal or at least some company. I thought about the little apartment I called home, the cozy kitchen where I could cook something simple but warm. It wouldn't be the grandest Thanksgiving feast, but it would be real. It would be mine. And as I sat there, planning quietly, I felt something shift inside me. The pain of being rejected by family was still there, but it was no longer the whole story. I was more than their judgment, more than their coldness. I was someone who could create her own space, her own traditions, her own sense of belonging. So, to anyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong or been pushed aside by the people who should love you most, remember this. Sometimes, the hardest rejection can be the beginning of something new, something better, something truly yours. And that's where my Thanksgiving story really begins. Hey everyone! If you've ever faced rejection from family and felt the sting of being left out, you know it's not something you just brush off overnight. After reading Jenna's cold text, "We don't have room for you this Thanksgiving," I sat with that ache for a while, but I wasn't ready to let it define my holiday. Instead of sinking into the usual sadness, I decided to take a different path. I wasn't going to accept this rejection quietly, no matter how painful it was. Thanksgiving had always been a complicated day for me. Years of feeling like the odd one out, the cousin who never quite fit in, had left a mark. I remembered past holidays where I was there in body but not in spirit, the quiet outsider surrounded by cousins who seemed to share an unspoken bond I wasn't part of. It was like watching a play from the wings, never invited on stage. But this year, something inside me shifted. Instead of retreating, I wanted to reclaim the day on my own terms. I started by reflecting on how I had been supporting myself independently all these years. While my cousins boasted about promotions, my life looked different. I'd carved out a meaningful existence in my own way, far from the family drama and the suffocating expectations. I didn't have the corner office or the fancy job title, but I had something just as valuable: resilience and a sense of purpose. I'd built a career freelancing in graphic design, working with clients who appreciated my creativity and dedication, and living in a cozy apartment filled with things I loved. I'd created a life where I was truly myself, even if it wasn't the version my family wanted to see. That realization gave me a little spark of hope. If my family wasn't going to make room for me, maybe I could make room for myself and maybe for others who, like me, felt left out or alone. I started thinking about the people in my neighborhood and social circle who might also be facing a quiet, lonely Thanksgiving. It felt like a small way to turn this rejection into something positive. So I began making plans. I reached out to a few friends who had mentioned they'd be spending the holiday solo. And I thought about neighbors I'd occasionally chat with in the hallways or at the local coffee shop. I wanted to create a space where no one felt invisible or unwanted, a place where gratitude and warmth could fill the room, even if the guest list was small. As I prepared my alternative plan, I realized how much this simple act of reaching out was already changing my perspective. Instead of feeling isolated, I felt connected. I thought about cooking a modest meal, something comforting and homemade, nothing fancy, but full of heart. Maybe some roasted vegetables, a pot of soup, fresh bread. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about creating a sense of belonging, even if just for a few hours. While organizing this impromptu gathering, I also reflected on the years I'd spent trying to fit into my family's mold. I remembered the subtle ways they had dismissed my choices, the sideways glances, the half-hearted compliments that never quite felt genuine. For a long time, I'd thought I needed their approval to feel whole. But now I saw how misplaced that was. My worth wasn't tied to their acceptance. I was enough just as I was. I also thought about how family isn't always about blood or tradition. Sometimes family is the people you choose, the ones who show up, who listen, who make space for you. This spark of understanding was both freeing and bittersweet. It meant letting go of old hopes, but also embracing new possibilities. As I made my guest list, I realized how many people quietly struggle with loneliness during the holidays, even if they don't say it out loud. I reached out to a few acquaintances who had recently moved to the city, and some who had lost loved ones. The responses were tentative but warm. We were all craving connection, even if we didn't realize it until now. I spent the next few days preparing, buying groceries, setting a small table in my living room, and even baking a pumpkin pie from scratch. The simple acts of cooking and welcoming felt soothing, like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized was missing. I found myself humming as I worked, imagining the conversations and laughter that might fill the space. Despite the quiet excitement building inside me, there was still a part of me that ached for the family I'd been shut out from. I wondered if Jenna understood how much her message hurt. Did she realize how those few words echoed years of subtle exclusion? I thought about the shared history, the childhood memories, and the unspoken hopes that maybe, one day, things would be different. But I also knew that hoping for change from those who had closed the door for so long might only lead to more disappointment. So I focused on what I could control, creating a Thanksgiving that felt authentic to me. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect parties. It was about kindness, presence, and building a little community where everyone was welcome. I sent out a few more texts and made calls, inviting people to join me for an evening of simple food and genuine company. As the day approached, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. Would anyone show up? Would the evening be awkward or warm? I didn't know, but I was ready to find out. This was my way of rewriting the story, not waiting for acceptance from the family that had turned me away, but forging my own path to connection. I also reflected on how much I'd grown over the years. The rejection I felt wasn't new, but my response was different. I wasn't retreating into silence or self-pity. I was stepping forward with intention and hope. It was a small act of defiance against the loneliness that so often shadows rejection. In the quiet moments before Thanksgiving, as I set the table and lit a few candles, I felt a sense of peace. This was my choice, my space, my day. And even if it wasn't the Thanksgiving I had once dreamed of with my family, it was real and meaningful. So here I was, on the edge of a new kind of holiday, one shaped by resilience, creativity, and the courage to build connection from the ground up. I wasn't sure what the night would bring, but I was ready to embrace it, surrounded by people who, like me, needed a place to belong. If you ever find yourself excluded or overlooked, remember this. Sometimes the best way to heal is to create your own space to find or make a community that sees you, values you, and welcomes you without conditions. That's what I was about to do, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Hey everyone, if you're curious about how things unfolded after I decided to reclaim Thanksgiving on my own terms, well, you're about to hear the story of a night that surprised me in the best ways. The day had arrived, and instead of feeling sorry for myself or wallowing in the rejection from my family, I was ready to turn my small apartment into a warm haven for anyone who needed it. I spent the morning bustling around my kitchen, the scent of roasting vegetables and baking pie filling the air. I set the table simply but thoughtfully, soft candles, mismatched plates, and a centerpiece of autumn leaves I'd gathered during a walk. It wasn't fancy, but it felt cozy and inviting. I kept glancing at my phone, wondering if anyone would actually show up. My guest list was small, just a handful of friends and neighbors who'd said they might come, but I hoped it would be enough to fill the silence. As the afternoon light softened, the doorbell rang. The first guest was Maria, a neighbor from down the hall who'd recently lost her husband and mentioned she'd be spending the holiday alone. She stepped inside hesitantly, carrying a bottle of wine and a shy smile. I welcomed her warmly, and instantly, the air shifted. It was the first crack in the loneliness that had settled over me. Soon after, more people began arriving, friends from work who didn't have family nearby, a young couple new to the city, and even a few acquaintances from the local community center. Each person came with their own story of being alone or displaced during the holidays, and as they gathered around the table, the room started to feel alive with connection. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, but better than I'd imagined. We shared stories, laughter, and the simple joy of being seen and accepted. The awkwardness of first meetings melted away as plates were passed and wine poured. There was a sense of gratitude in the room that wasn't forced or superficial, but genuine, a collective recognition that we'd found something rare, a place to belong. Then, just as we were settling into the evening, the unexpected happened. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was Jenna, my cousin. She stood there with a confused look, followed by a few other family members who had come along. I was stunned. I hadn't expected them to show up, especially after her cold text weeks earlier. Their surprise was palpable as they looked around the room, taking in the warmth and laughter that filled the space. I invited them in without hesitation. The atmosphere shifted again, this time tinged with curiosity and unspoken questions. Jenna's eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something different there. Not judgment, but uncertainty. I explained that this was my Thanksgiving, a gathering I'd put together for those who felt left out or alone. I told them about the message I'd received and how it had pushed me to create something new, not to hurt or exclude, but to build connection. The room was quiet for a moment, then conversation slowly resumed, this time with my family members joining in. They saw the people I'd invited, heard their stories, and felt the genuine warmth that had filled the evening. It was clear that the coldness they'd shown before didn't match what was happening here now. The gathering wasn't about status, bloodlines, or fitting into some ideal. They were witnessing a community built on kindness and acceptance. Watching Jenna and the others interact with my guests, I realized something profound. The rejection had been painful, yes, but it had also been a catalyst for something beautiful. I'd created a space that was richer and more meaningful than any traditional family dinner could have been. This wasn't just about food or tradition, it was about belonging. And that night, everyone in that room experienced it. The surprise visit sparked conversations that might never have happened otherwise. Old grievances surfaced, but so did moments of understanding and empathy. It was messy, imperfect, and real. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just the outsider. I was the host, the creator of a new kind of family. As the evening wore on, laughter grew louder, stories flowed more freely, and the sense of community deepened. The room was filled with people who had once felt invisible, now seen and valued. It was a Thanksgiving unlike any other I'd ever known. That night taught me that sometimes, when you're pushed away by those you expect to keep you close, the best response is to open your door wider, invite others in, and build a family of your own choosing. The warmth and connection I found that evening were proof that belonging isn't about where you come from, but who welcomes you in. So, if you're ever feeling left out or excluded, remember this story. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is creating a space where you and others like you can truly belong. And that's exactly what I did that night. Hey everyone, if you want to hear how things really started to shift after that unexpected Thanksgiving gathering, stick with me. After opening my door to neighbors, friends, and then my own family who showed up uninvited and surprised, I quickly realized the evening was about to teach me way more than I'd expected. When Jenna and the others walked into my little apartment, the warmth and laughter hit them like a wave. I could see it in their faces, the surprise, the hesitation, and slowly, a dawning realization. I'd spent years feeling like the outsider, the cousin who didn't fit, and now they were facing a scene that challenged every assumption they'd made about me. The room wasn't just warm because of the candles or the food, it was alive with genuine connection and gratitude, something they hadn't expected to find here. Jenna's expression shifted as she watched me move around, hosting with a quiet confidence I hadn't shown around her before. She noticed how my guests weren't polished or pretentious, they were real people, each with their own story of loneliness or struggle. Yet here we were, sharing a meal and conversation like old friends. It was clear that the rejection she dealt me was met with a strength and generosity she hadn't anticipated. Later, when we found a quieter moment, Jenna pulled me aside. Her voice was softer, tinged with regret. She admitted that her message had been harsher than she intended, born out of stress and old family tensions she hadn't fully processed. More than that, she confessed that she'd taken for granted what it meant to have family, assuming that bonds would hold no matter what. Seeing this gathering, seeing me and the others building something so genuine, made her rethink everything. I told her it wasn't about blame or pointing fingers. This wasn't about winning or losing family approval. It was about understanding that family isn't always where you're born, but where you're seen and valued. The fact that she'd come tonight, even hesitantly, showed me she was open to change. That was enough for now. The other family members shared similar sentiments. Some were embarrassed by how they'd overlooked me, caught up in their own busy lives and assumptions. They voiced a desire to rebuild, to not let old grudges or misunderstandings keep us apart. The room, which had felt so divided before, now held a fragile but real hope. This moment forced Jenna, and maybe all of us, to reconsider what family truly meant. It wasn't about physical presence or tradition alone, it was about kindness, acceptance, and the willingness to embrace each other's flaws and journeys. That night, my family faced the reality that exclusion doesn't heal wounds, it deepens them. But connection, even when messy, plants seeds for healing. I found myself reflecting on how much pain had been wrapped up in the years of silence and avoidance. We'd all been carrying unspoken judgments and expectations that kept us at a distance. But now, with honest conversations starting to flow, there was a chance to break that cycle. The guests I'd invited, those who had felt invisible for years, were quietly witnessing this family reckoning. Their presence was a reminder that belonging isn't exclusive. It can be expanded, redefined, and shared. That evening felt like a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone there. As the night deepened, I saw Jenna relax, laugh, and even share stories of our childhood I hadn't heard before. It was as if the walls between us were slowly crumbling, brick by brick. She expressed regret for how she'd treated me and a hope that we could move forward with more honesty and respect. For me, that moment was powerful. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or erasing pain, but about choosing to build something better despite it. It was about accepting imperfection in ourselves and others and opening the door to real connection. The family dynamic was still fragile. Old wounds don't heal overnight, but there was a newfound willingness to listen and engage. That night didn't erase years of hurt, but it cracked open a space where healing could begin. As I looked around the room, filled with both family and chosen family, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't the Thanksgiving I'd imagined as a child, but it was real, authentic, and full of possibility. I'd turned exclusion into inclusion, loneliness into community, and in doing so, I'd reclaimed my place not just at the table, but in the hearts of those who mattered. So if you've ever been shut out or made to feel less than by your own family, remember this. Sometimes it takes one brave step to open the door, to invite understanding, and to let healing begin. And when it does, the possibilities for connection are endless. Hey everyone! I want to share what happened after that intense, emotional Thanksgiving night, the moment when my cousin Jenna and I finally had a real, heartfelt conversation. If you've ever carried the weight of family misunderstandings and long-held grudges, you know how hard it can be to break the silence. But sometimes, it's exactly those tough talks that start to heal the deepest wounds. After the gathering, Jenna and I found some quiet time away from the buzz of the evening. The air between us had shifted. The old tension hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter, as if both of us were ready to be honest, without the usual defenses. She looked at me with a mix of regret and vulnerability and said, "I'm sorry for what I said and for all the times I didn't make space for you, even when you were right in front of me." Her apology caught me off guard because I hadn't expected it so soon or so openly. It was clear she'd been carrying her own regrets, maybe more than I had realized. She admitted that in the rush of her own life, the stress, the expectations from others, the pressure to keep up appearances, she'd lost sight of what really mattered: family, connection, and kindness. We talked about how easy it is to take family for granted, assuming that relationships will always be there without effort or understanding. Jenna confessed that she often assumed I was fine on my own, that I didn't need the family's support or approval. But seeing me host that dinner, seeing the warmth and community I created, made her realize how wrong she'd been. It wasn't just about a place at the table. It was about being seen, valued, and included. I shared my side too, how years of feeling like the outsider had left scars, how I'd kept my distance not because I didn't want family, but because I'd been hurt by exclusion and judgment. I told her how her message, "We don't have room for you," wasn't just about space in a house, but about space in their hearts. That honesty wasn't easy, but it opened a door between us. We both recognized that the past couldn't be changed, but the future was ours to shape. I told Jenna I wasn't interested in pretending everything was perfect or sweeping years of hurt under the rug. What mattered was building a relationship grounded in truth, respect, and mutual care. She nodded, agreeing that it was time to stop avoiding the tough stuff and start being real with each other. Our conversation drifted to those other family members who had shown up unexpectedly that night. Jenna admitted she'd been surprised by their reactions. Some were defensive, others remorseful, but all had moments of clarity about how they'd contributed to the distance between us. We agreed that rebuilding those connections would take time and patience, but it was worth the effort. Jenna also expressed a desire to change how she approached family gatherings going forward. No more closed doors or exclusionary messages. She wanted to create space for everyone, even if it meant stretching beyond comfort zones or confronting uncomfortable feelings. That willingness meant a lot to me. It was a sign that she was ready to grow and to prioritize connection over convenience. I shared my hope that we could all learn to appreciate each other's journeys, even when they didn't look like traditional success stories. I wanted family to be a place of encouragement, not judgment, of acceptance, not competition. Jenna listened carefully, and I could tell she was taking it to heart. We also talked about how important it was to be honest with each other moving forward. No more assumptions or unspoken resentments. Instead, we agreed to communicate openly, even when it was uncomfortable. That kind of honesty felt like a fresh start, a way to rebuild trust, piece by piece. As the night grew late, we promised to keep this new chapter alive, to check in with each other more often, and to invite others in the family to do the same. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a realistic beginning, one that acknowledged the past but didn't let it dictate the future. Walking away from that conversation, I felt lighter than I had in years. The walls I'd built to protect myself were still there, but now they had doors and windows, places where light could come in and where others could enter if they chose. I wasn't naive. I knew there would be bumps ahead, moments of frustration, and old patterns to break. But for the first time, I felt hopeful. That hope wasn't just for me and Jenna, but for the whole family. It was a chance to redefine what family meant to us, not just a group tied by blood, but a community built on respect, understanding, and genuine care. I hoped that night was just the first step in a longer journey toward healing and belonging. If you're dealing with family struggles or feeling shut out, know that it's okay to want more. More honesty, more respect, more connection. And sometimes, the hardest conversations are the ones that open the door to something better. Jen and I found that door together, and it's a door I'm committed to walking through, one step at a time. Hey everyone, if you've been following my story, you know how Thanksgiving went from a painful rejection to a gathering that changed everything. Now, I want to share how all those moments left me feeling empowered and hopeful about what's next. Even though the family dynamics are still fragile, there's a new door open, and I'm ready to walk through it. After that night, I felt something shift deep inside me. I realized that turning rejection into opportunity wasn't just a one-time thing, it was a mindset, a way of living that I wanted to carry forward. I'd taken what felt like a painful no and transformed it into a space filled with warmth, connection, and real belonging. That feeling of empowerment grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. I knew the family relationships weren't magically fixed overnight. There were still unspoken tensions, old habits, and unresolved feelings hovering in the background. But the fact that Jenna and a few others showed willingness to change gave me hope. It was a fragile hope, yes, but hope nonetheless, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to start rebuilding. I kept in touch with Jenna more regularly after that, and although our conversations weren't always easy, they were honest. We checked in on each other's feelings, navigated misunderstandings, and celebrated small victories. That openness felt like the foundation for something real, something sustainable. I held on to the belief that family doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. At the same time, I continued to nurture the chosen family I'd created, the friends, neighbors, and new connections who had welcomed me into their lives. They reminded me daily that belonging isn't confined to blood ties or tradition. It's about who shows up, who listens, and who stands beside you. Their presence was a balm for the wounds left by exclusion, and I leaned into that community with gratitude and joy. This experience also deepened my understanding of what it means to truly belong. It's not about fitting into someone else's expectations or trying to earn approval. It's about finding or building spaces where you can be unapologetically yourself, where your worth isn't questioned or measured by arbitrary standards. That insight changed how I approached relationships, family or otherwise. I began to see my own strength more clearly too. I'd always been independent, but this journey taught me that independence doesn't mean isolation. It means choosing connection on your own terms, creating bonds that nurture and sustain you. That realization was incredibly freeing. Looking ahead, I'm committed to fostering authentic connections with family, friends, and new people who cross my path. I want to keep building that sense of community and inclusion, both for myself and for others who might feel left out or unseen. I know it won't always be easy and there will be setbacks, but I'm ready to face them with courage and an open heart. So, if you've ever felt excluded or undervalued by those you thought would always be there, remember this. Sometimes exclusion can lead you to build a stronger, chosen family, one that celebrates who you really are. It's not about replacing your past, but expanding your present and future with love and acceptance. That's the story of how I turned what felt like the coldest rejection into the warmest invitation, not from others, but from myself. And that's a Thanksgiving I'll carry with me every day. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.